My name is Greg Stovell, and I'm Senior Pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Before coming to Westchester, I served as Senior Pastor at First United Presbyterian Church in Belleville, Illinois. I was there for about 5 years, and before that, my first ordained call was Associate Pastor in Caldwell, New Jersey. My family, there's 4 of us. Susie and I have been married for a little over 20 years now. And we have 2 kids. Susie, also same name, our daughter, she will be a senior in high school in September. And Harry, who is 15, and he's a junior in high school right now. I was born in Mexico City. My father was Mexican, my mother is English, and I grew up in between both countries. So half of the year we were in Mexico City, that's where I went to school. And as soon as school was over, at some point in May, we would travel to London. Growing up in both cultures at the same time and both languages at the same time. It's more than a unique upbringing. It's kind of a linguistic accident, really, and became really involved with the church at a very early age. I used to go to a big church in Mexico, and I mean a massive church. There were about 3,000 in attendance every Sunday. And once a year, they used to do what they call Bible Olympics. And there was one event called rhetoric. It really was preaching. And so when I was about 8 years old, I wrote a sermon. I won the competition. The pastor got a hold of it, and he said, "Do you want to preach it?" I was like, "Sure." So I stood in front of the congregation, and little old me went ahead and preached a 5-minute sermon on Psalm 23. When it was over, I don't remember it, but my mother says that I went and sat back in the pew and said, "That was cool." I've always been fascinated by electronics. And so I went straight into studying first computer science. Then I switched majors and went to electronic engineering, telecommunications. I was supposed to specialize, choose a focus of study. So I went to my advisor and I asked her, and she said, "Well, go to your home and take a look at your bookcases and find what kind of books you have the most about." And I went home and started counting my books, and lo and behold, I had more on New Testament than anything else. And that was just an enormous revelation right there. The incorporation of all electronics into ministry right now is key, especially given this time. First Pres Westchester, where I serve right now, is a great congregation, and we've been working really hard for years now at trying to modernize all of our communications. And so we began doing online streaming about 4 years ago now. And thankfully, very gratefully, we were all set up for when the quarantine hit. I actually heard about First Pres New York a long time ago when I was ordained as Associate Pastor in Caldwell. With 9/11, I started following the ministry of several churches in New York City. And so I started following the ministry of John Walton back then. And ever since, I've known about First Church. I became a lot more conscious about the church when I heard that John was retiring. And a friend of mine told me that it would probably be a good fit if I started applying and talking to the Pastor Nominating Committee that way. Then we started the conversations. The ministry of First Pres, as I said, has always called my attention, specifically the ministry that the church has had for advocacy for the LGBTQ community and full inclusion and full hospitality. It's a church that's been leading the discussions in the denomination for a very long time. There are several other issues that the church is facing that are very dear to my heart. For me specifically, given my background, refugee ministry and immigration style ministry and immigration advocacy, that's another thing that really attracted me to the church. Starting anew at First Pres New York, if the way be clear, is definitely very exciting and very challenging, just because it's New York City in the middle of a pandemic. The connectedness that we normally feel as being part of a church has been compromised, even in spite of the great job that the church is doing with social media and reaching out. It's not the same as being in person. And so the constant reaching out and making sure that everybody knows that they're loved and cared for, and connecting with, as I said, if the vote goes well, with a new pastor is going to be really important. And then added to that, the complexity of reopening a church. The ministry of just about every church in major metropolitan areas are going to be not just a reopening, but a rebuilding. Once we're able to be back together again, the long-term vision, I think, for the church is to go back and rebuild on the good, solid heritage and foundation the church has. What are the number one needs in the community, in Greenwich Village and its surroundings, obviously, to see if they have shifted over the course of this pandemic. Aside from that, building up on some of the other great ministries the church has, taking the relationship with Taguasco in Cuba to the next level will be really, really interesting. And also building on some of the other outreach that the church has in the community. For example, the one to college students and establishing those relationships, and with artists. Greenwich Village is known for the arts. I'd love to see you in person, because through electronic media, it's really hard to get the cues of who each other are and how can we do ministry together. That said, what I'd love to do is to hear, if we're meeting for the first time, your story, and then tell you my story and see where God makes those two come together for either new opportunities for volunteerism or service. But I think the number one thing is just to get to know each other and see where God has led you and where God has led me to this point.